So good morning, everybody. My name is Shay Carbis, Regional Commercial Director for Global Reviews. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on superannuation and the decision-making landscape that consumers are going through when looking for a relevant superannuation fund. I'd like to introduce you to Yetta Doherty, our Senior Client Advisor, who has been working across the superannuation industry and the digital sales effectiveness benchmarking for about 18 months now. Yetta's graciously given up some of her time to share with you some of the insights from our most recent digital marketing effectiveness study that was conducted in July. So without further delay, I'll hand you over to Yetta, who'll be able to take you through some of the insights that we've gleaned from that. I would just like to mention that if you hang on to the call today, that we'll have time at the end where there's a special offer for those clients that are interested in taking up or investigating more about the digital marketing effectiveness. Over to you, Yetta.
Yes, thank you, Shay. Let's just start this presentation. So we've already done the introduction. First of all, I'd like you to just get a little bit of an insight into Global Reviews and why companies subscribe to our data. So our clients subscribe to Global Reviews behavioural data for a number of reasons. One is to inform strategy in general. We also have consumer insights and competitive intelligence that no one else collects. Others subscribe to get an insight into customer experience and channel performance, or to inform their priorities for digital programs, or just generally get a best practice knowledge base across their industry and across competitors. But what we're going to look at today is how to understand your competitors' traffic. So you may know a lot about your own traffic and your own customers, but there's a lot of traffic that you are not aware of because it goes to your competitors. So we'll look into that today. So there's always this notion about, is there too much data, or do not have enough data, do not have the right data? I'm sure you all have access to different types of information or data at different level in the funnel. So you probably got access to brand tracking to understand what influences a click prior to visiting your site. You've got your Google Analytics and AdWords to understand visitor acquisition. Then you've got your Omniture or Analytics again to understand your site and what influence and how users are using your site and how they drop out. And you've got ClickTail to understand, do your call to actions work? But at this point in time, we would say that you have nothing that looks at the end-to-end down the funnel, so the whole aspects from first interaction with the brand, and nothing that looks at the prospects. So you may know a lot about yourself, but not so much about your competitors. And also, that's pretty much what we're going to look at today. So give you some insight into what are the competitors doing. So this piece of research is called Digital Marketing Effectiveness, and why this is an interesting and important piece of research is because it explores the traffic that you don't already know about. It helps you understand your competitors' audience. So say, okay, I know who's selected me, but I don't know those who don't prefer to go with me and why. It gives you an understanding on the impact of your broader offline activities as well as your online marketing on attraction, discovery, and finally a selection for your brand. And it gives you the why behind a customer behaviour. So why are they choosing a certain brand? Why do they behave the way they do? Where do they go? So it gives you those extra insights, which gives you a perspective on your entire industry, and it gives you a new way to understand your competitor activity. As we go through this presentation, you will also see that it's we'll take you through our data portal where all the data is available, and you can see how it's fully customizable, so you can really track or follow a brand that you want to have more insight into by using this engine. And lastly, it will give you really clear, actionable data to generate some sales. What we're going to look at is that journey from a brand recall through to how do a prospective customer go and explore a brand how do they shortlist, what are the key triggers, and what are the reasons that they shortlist a brand, and then at the end, why do they finally prefer one. So there's a couple of metrics here that is prior to their research, which is the brand recall and the initial preference, and everything else is once they've started research, what influences them online. If we look at the whole customer journey, what this particular piece of research is focused on is really how do they discover your brand and how do they consider it and why. So those are the two aspects of the research that we're going to look into, get some insights in today. We won't go through the whole research. We'll have pointed out key findings for it. So the methodology behind this is what we call a blank screen methodology. It's a remote user testing where the users sit in their own environment, in their own homes, and do a task that they would normally do. They're given a specific piece of work to do, so in this case your task is to do as much research as you need across the internet to identify a public superannuation account. So that means an account that's open to anyone. You do not need to apply for an account, but simply do as much research as you need to define a short list of the companies that you would think you would select one from and that best meets your needs. So that's the actual task that they're given in this particular case. And what it helps us understand and track is what sites do they visit, what URLs do they go to, what search engine or search terms do they use. We also get the opportunity to ask them about brand recall and initial preference questions before they go through this task, and also behavioural and brand preferences after the task and general behaviour. The study has 200 participants, Australian adults. It's representative of the Australian population, and as Shay mentioned earlier, the latest study is run in July 2014. Now these studies can run on a monthly or quarterly basis depending on the industry or the client's needs. So let's go into some of the findings or some of the research. So we first will look at brand recall and initial preference based on that initial brand recall. So in this study, 17% of the participants were unable to recall a superannuation brand. Now you may have seen a stat that was going around in terms of this. Around 23% was unable to recall. So we've seen, that was from an earlier study. So we've seen that now more people are more aware or becoming more aware of superannuation brands, and also it suggests that it's becoming more important to know about this topic. If we look at what were the brands that they mostly recalled, so Australian Super and AMP were the top ones at both 31%, followed by Rest and Hester at 30 and 20%. Now what we want to find out is that the brands that are most recalled, does that automatically lead them to be the initially most preferred brand as well? Or is that not correlated? So you may recall a brand, but would you also be willing to prefer that brand? So if we look at a top initial preference, we saw that Australian Super is still the top one at 7%, whereas, for instance, AMP has dropped down to about 2% out of the total of 31. They both have the top recall, so this suggests obviously some sort of brand influence that is placed on the initial preference before they do any research. However, Hester came up as the second highest initial preference from a slightly lower unprompted recall rate. So why would they have an initial preference? What is it that make them believe that they would be able to select one from the brands that they already know? Majority says, well, I'm already a current customer with this brand, so at this point in time I'll take that, I'll stick with that brand, or I trust the company, I've used them before. Now what is key to understand here, that it was only 45% of all the participants that really had an initial preference, so there's still 55% that said, yeah, I know about all these brands, but I'm not willing to already have an initial preference. I want to find out what other options I have. And another thing I like to just highlight is that we also ask them whether they are currently with a super fund, which one that is. And it was about 13% said they were with Australian Super, and about the same for rest, so 13%. So even though they are a current customer, it doesn't necessarily influence them that much that they will necessarily go with that particular font that they're already with. So why did they not, for those 55% who did not have an initial preference, why do we think that is? Well, mostly they tell us that they don't know enough about the companies. They're familiar with the brand name, but they don't know enough to actually make a decision. They need to learn more about the industry or the accounts, or at 36%, they need to confirm the specific features and options that are available to them. Now this, we've seen that over the year, or last 18 months probably, that the industry is maturing, and customers or prospective customers are placing a greater value in understanding the super fund, what's in it for them, what are the different features, what are the accounts, what are the fees, and these percentages really just confirm that there is a greater interest in that. So at this stage we've worked out that yes, there are some brands that are recalled more, they're not necessarily selected, and that over half of the people involved will still like to do some more research. So now they go off, we send them off to do the task, and we look at where they go and what they do and what sites they visit, and why, and how they behave. So not surprisingly, a lot of people, 95%, goes to a search engine at some point during their research. 61% would visit a brand site, which will be one of the superannuation funds, and over half would also go to research sites to get some more information, to try and understand which one is the best one for me, to really get the details of the funds and the difference, and how the different funds would benefit different needs to select the right one. About a third will go to a comparison site such as CanStar. What this study allows us to is to actually extract the most common path that users take, and this shows the most common path. So 21% of everyone would start with a search, and then go to a brand. But if you look at this and start seeing how many actually starts with the search, it's as high as 94% who would go and start the whole investigation using a search. Now just keep in mind that there was 83% who could recall a brand up front, and 45% had an initial brand preference, but they would still use search as their main starting point. So they don't go straight to the brand to find out more about this brand or other brands that they recall. They'll go straight to search to find out or to get an insight into what other options are there, and how can I find more information about accounts. Now, through this research, we've worked out what brands they actually go and visit. So we look at their brand tracking. So we go, okay, so what brands did consumers use? Okay, Australian Super is still high. It was also a highly recalled brand as well. So that's not so surprising. What's more surprising is that a brand like ING Direct was visited a lot, the second highest visited brand, but it was not part of the recall session. The other one to look at is BT, which was also not very high on the recall, but it's part of the visited brands. And now we can go and explore why they would go and visit that, and what that visit will translate to in terms of preference and shortlisting. So if we type in superannuation fund, which is one of the common terms that were typed in the keywords, along with a number of other terms that, like superannuation accounts or super funds or super, what we found that ING Direct is very aggressive on their pay-per-click advertisement, and one of the strengths that we saw that they were not just on this particular term, but a lot of different keyword terms that are all related to super. The other strength of this search result is that it's quite compelling in terms of its enticing language, and therefore help the click-through rate from this. So that's why this brand would have been visited a lot. So that's obviously, this is where the role of search plays. some sort of a role in terms of awareness for one, and then visitation secondly. Now, does that necessarily lead to shortlisting? Well, that's what we're going to have a look at later. But it certainly comes up as a brand that users then go and visit in this particular case. From our data portal that I mentioned earlier, we can extract a number of different data points. All brands are represented in there, and I just took the one of ING Direct just to give you an idea about. So the recall was really low at 3%, but as we just saw, they've visited a lot, and then that actually has translated into quite a high shortlisting as well. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea about how this data can be interpreted and the influence of the behaviour or the journeys that the potential customer takes through their research process. Another common search term that we found through the research was compare superannuation. Again, a lot of people want to understand different options, and CanStar and also MoneySmart came up, but what we found that CanStar in particular was the preferred brand, so 34% visited comparison sites, and 99% of those visited CanStar, and they also visited a search. So it's sort of, that's where they get the information from, and I think we probably already know the importance of search, but this just helps reinforce the fact that search really helped that brand awareness, prompting the brand, oh yeah, I've heard about that, once they see it, and then they go and visit it. I did a little search on the CanStar as well, and it just depends on the parameters that you put in, what type of brands you get back. But in this case, I got some brands back, and we'll look at that in a minute. So exposure to that brand familiarity via comparison sites and search certainly influences the awareness and possibly also the shortlisting, which we will see in a minute. So what I did was that we've looked, this is just a snapshot of the portal, so I can go in and put a filter on it. So in this case I put a filter on aggregator, which are the comparison sites. So go, okay, everyone who visited a comparison site, what brands did they in the end shortlist? So there's a list here on the right hand side, and I've just got them in another slide in a minute that's a bit easier to read, and we can also see what exact path those people take, or common path that those people take for visit an aggregator site. So it's all from Google, they get to CanStar or they get to MoneySmart, and then they get to CanStar, and then they go to a brand. So it sort of starts to show the importance of a comparison site like CanStar as well in terms of influencing the brand awareness and shortlisting. So if we look at what brands they shortlisted, those who visited a comparison site, and keep in mind that that was predominantly CanStar, Australian Super, IND Direct, AMP, Rest and ANZ were the top 5. So apart from ANZ, the top 5 shortlisted brands are also amongst the top 5 preferred brand, and 2 of those featured on CanStar. Now keep in mind, depending on what search you do on CanStar, you will get different brands as well. So there could easily have been more that others have seen than the ones I've highlighted here. So there's no doubt that being present on a comparison site like CanStar influences decision, shortlisting preference, excuse me, and ultimately to be a preferred brand, in the end, you need to be shortlisted. So what you want to do is to get to the shortlist and make an impression to be the preferred brand. We also asked them, those who visited a comparison site, if you found something you were happy with on that particular comparison site, what would you do? And over half of them said they would go to apply online directly with the provider site. About 30% said, yep, I'll do the same, but over the phone. And about 5% said they would apply directly through the comparison site if that's possible. Excuse me. So now we know where they've gone and some of the things that, some of the parameters that trigger their visits and where they go. Now we're going to look at what do they shortlist. So what we've done here is taken off the filter for the comparison site, and then we look at which brands do they overall shortlist the most. If you look at it overall, Australian Super was the highest shortlisted brand with A&P, and then ING Direct, Rest and Colonial First Estate as equal seconds. We also asked them why did you choose those brands to shortlist. Most of them says I'm familiar with the name, but there's also I saw it when I used a Google search as the second highest reason why they were put it on the shortlist, and that's obviously how ING Direct ended up on the shortlist in this particular case. Please notice that Colonial First Estate is also on the high on the list of the shortlisted brands, and in a minute we'll look at which ones were the preferred brands. Excuse me. The final preferred brand, again, Australian Super has a strong brand that keeps it going through visitation, shortlisting and brand preference. But what's interesting to see is that ING Direct made it to the preferred brand of 4%, whereas someone like Colonial First Estate didn't make it to the top 10, even though it was quite high on the shortlisting. So let's look at that. Again, the reasons why they prefer a brand is the trust. I've used them before, but also good fees and investment options. So what can we learn from this is that you cannot underestimate your brand's reputation and the value of trust, but nor should you rely on it, because good fees and investment options rank quite high in reasons for preferring a company. And again, as we asked them about what companies they were currently with, they haven't necessarily put those on their preferred list in the end. So, for instance, no one said they were with ING Direct, and ING Direct now got 4%. 6% mentioned they were with Colonial First Estate, but no one has preferred them in the end. So that suggests to us that there is a bit of a market for switches, or you can look at it the other way and go, there's an opportunity to really focus on retention strategies to save current customers from going somewhere else. So let's look at the example of Colonial and their lost opportunities and who is winning their customers. So you can say every time you get it to the shortlist, you, in an ideal world, you should be preferred. Now that's obviously not always the case. So they had 20% shortlisted them, but they didn't make it to the top 10. Again, this is out of our data portal where we can go and filter by the brand that we're looking at. So what we're going to look at is a lost opportunity report. And here it suggests that Colonial had a lost opportunity of 79%. So these are the people who actually shortlisted them but didn't prefer them in the end. They've lost nearly 80% of those people. Now this is always going to be a negative figure, because unless you're very lucky and everyone who puts you on your shortlist selects you, but obviously we're going to try and minimise the figure. The other two figures that are here is recall retention, which is about, so how many of those who could recall you from the start actually preferred you at the end, and the visit to conversion is how many of those who visited you had a good impression and also preferred you in the end. And that tells you something about how well your website and your product offering is executed. So that's really about the whole how well or what the customer experience that you provide on the website. We do have another piece of research that focuses on that, which is called digital sales effectiveness, or how easy is it to buy from you, but that's a different piece of research. So let's look at the lost opportunity that happened to Colonial. So if we go through the lost opportunity report, you will see all the brands and which ones have lost how many from shortlisting to preferred. I'd like to point out here that apart from Colonial, we also have BT and ANZ have quite a high attrition. But this is really a great metric or great management tool for stickiness and attrition or attraction. Try to understand what's happening. What's even better is you can see who of those who had, in this case, Colonial on their shortlist, which other brands did they end up selecting in the end, and that we're going to look at now. So this can tell me, okay, so all these people had me as Colonial on their shortlist, which brand did they end up with in the end? And we can see here that Colonial's key competitors would then be Australian Super, Rest, Sun Super, Hester and A&P as the top ones. And we can also try and understand why that is. And again, it's when there's no filter on it, it's broader. So I've used them before. I trust the company and they have good fees and investment options. You could go in and say those who chose, put a filter on and go those who chose Australian Super, were the difference in the answers there, and then you can start to understand what is it that is unique about that brand that make customers want to choose that instead of or over your brand, for instance. And that competitive intelligence sets you one step apart from your peers. We've already mentioned that ING Direct gained visitors or gained customers through the process, so they had only a recall of 3%, but were preferred by 4 in the end. And because of the high visitation, they also have a high shortlist. So what I've done again is I put a filter on and go everyone who shortlisted ING Direct. Which other brands did they shortlist? So again, there you know you'll pick that brand can easily go in and understand their key competitors and why that is by filtering the reasons why they would go and shortlist those brands. If we then look at those who shortlisted ING Direct and also preferred ING Direct, what were the reasons for that? Now this is where it becomes interesting because these reasons are quite different. So we always know they had a high visitation, which led to a high shortlisting. Now everyone who shortlisted this brand, or a lot of them, said that they preferred it in the end because the website was visually appealing. They had good fees and investment options, and their options were easy to understand. And this is these reasons are stated over the trust and the familiarity of the brand, which means that really the experience that you give on the website has a huge influence on the final preference as well. It's not just about the brand, it's not just about being found in search, it's also the experience that you give them once they have a visit and a look around to see whether your offering is compelling. So this is pretty much taking you through some of the key findings. There's lots and lots of different stories that we can tell, just depending on what brand we look at. But these are some of the top stories that we found was worth sharing with you. A little bit of insight into the research trends. So generally a prospect would spend 2 to 4 hours, or 31% say they would spend 2 to 4 hours researching, with another 12% saying they would spend 4 to 6 hours finding out which super fund is right for them. They would do that over an elapsed period of 7 days, and they would typically look at 3 to 4 funds to research and get more information about. What device do they mostly use this for? It's not surprising that predominantly their research is done on a home computer, with 30% saying they would do all the research on a home computer, and another 44% mentioning that it would be 50 to 99% of all research would be done from their home computer. There's still about up to 25% indicate that they would primarily use a smartphone to get the insights. So the importance of online is worth mentioning. There's 66% prefer to get fees and charges through the website, just want to do it themselves and find out more information, and if they're happy, 52% indicate that they prefer to apply online. So just to sum up what we've seen today, do not underestimate the value of brand trust, but don't rely on it either. Just seem to have a little bit of a technical issue here. Your search results, they are both the quality of the content, but also the ranking, of course, plays a large role for brand awareness and hence shortlisting and visitation. well-executed website influences brand perception and the final preference. When you know what your competitors are doing and why the customer may prefer someone else, you have the right insights to become a competitive player. And despite some loyalty from existing members, many are interested in researching their options and choose a different fund than they're currently with. So this just indicates that there is a market for switching or taking over customers from other funds. So that's pretty much what we had to say today. I'll just hand over to Shay for the final 2 slides. Thank you for your attention, and I will be in touch.
Thanks, Ed. I really appreciate you sharing those insights with everybody. We've had a pretty good attendance actually today, which is awesome to see. I wanted to use this opportunity to announce that we'll be launching, or we have launched, a new global review search acquisition tool. As with the methodology that we applied to the digital marketing effectiveness study, it allows us to capture information about the search behaviour of those consumers or prospective customers that have got genuine intent for a product or service. So this is going to provide you some data that's been missing in your analytics for a while, and one of the key things, in fact, will be competitive organic search traffic. So just want to use this opportunity to mention that. We launched it at our Digital Leaders Summit back in June, and the response has been very favourable from the market. Now, at the start of the session today, I did mention that we had an offer for people that attended today. The digital marketing effectiveness is actually coming out of beta testing, which we've been running for the last 12 months, and we're now going to be moving into a monthly deliverable, so monthly data captures, which is really going to help you sort of keep a pulse on consumer intent and awareness and recall and decisioning behaviour on a regular basis. So normally the data captures was $10,500 per data capture. Offer for the first 5 subscribing clients is $5,000 per data capture, which represents a 50% discount on that data capture, and we're also be including complimentary access to the new search acquisition tool. So that offer ends at the end of September. Obviously a lot to sort of take in today, but what I'd like to do is that if you would like to get in touch and understand more about the program overall, and that would include our digital sales effectiveness component, which we haven't covered today, I'd be more than happy to get you a phone call, your email and your inquiry, and take you through a little bit more about how you can apply these findings and insights back into your business to drive effective sales outcomes for your respective businesses. So with that, I'd like to sign off and thank you yet again for your time. All the best, and hope everyone has a great Tuesday.
Thanks.